The sun was beating down on the large glass windows of the car showroom, making the entire room feel like a greenhouse. It was one of those afternoons where the air conditioning seemed to be fighting a losing battle. Inside, the air smelled like expensive leather and new tires, a smell that usually meant money and success. But for Tom, standing near the back of the showroom, the smell just made him feel sick to his stomach. Tom wiped a bit of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He checked his watch. It was only 2 in the afternoon, but it felt like he had been there for a week. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a sharp vibration against his leg. He knew who it was without looking. It was the bank. Or maybe it was his landlord. It didn't really matter anymore. They all wanted the same thing, money he didn't have. He had missed a payment on his car last week, and the final notice for his rent was sitting on his kitchen counter at home, buried under a pile of unopened mail. The weight of it felt like a physical load on his shoulders, pressing down harder with every breath he took. He looked around the showroom. There were shiny sports cars, polished to a mirror finish, and big family SUVs that cost more than Tom made in a year. He used to love looking at them. He used to dream of driving one off the lot himself. Now, they just looked like reminders of everything he couldn't afford. He felt like a fraud, wearing a suit that was starting to fray at the cuffs and a tie that felt like a noose. His boss, a man who yelled more than he spoke, had warned him that morning. 3 sales this week, Tom, or don't bother coming back on Monday. The words echoed in his head. 3 sales. He hadn't had a single serious customer in 4 days. Every time someone walked in, they were just browsing, or they had bad credit, or they were just wasting time to get out of the heat. Tom tried to fix his face into a smile. It was part of the job. Always be welcoming, the training manual said. He took a deep breath, trying to push the dark thoughts about his debt and his angry boss out of his mind. He needed to focus. He needed a miracle. Just then the front sensor chimed. The automatic glass slid open with a smooth hiss, and a man walked in. Tom looked up, squinting slightly against the glare of the sun coming through the glass. The man didn't look like the usual crowd. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't dressed in flashy clothes to show off money. He was wearing a simple, dark jacket, a t-shirt, and worn-out boots. He had a bit of scruff on his face, like he hadn't shaved in a couple of days. He looked ordinary. He looked like someone who might be having just as bad a day as Tom was. The visitor walked slowly, his hands deep in his pockets. He didn't walk with the arrogance of a rich guy looking to buy a toy. He walked with a quiet sort of slowness, looking around with genuine interest. He passed by the red convertible that Tom usually tried to push on people, but he didn't even glance at the price sticker. Tom felt a flicker of annoyance. He didn't have time for looky-loos today. He needed a buyer, someone with a checkbook and a pen. But he had a job to do. He pushed himself off the back wall and walked toward the man, forcing his smile to stay on his face. "Good afternoon," Tom said, his voice sounding a bit tighter than he wanted. "Welcome to the showroom. Anything specific I can help you find today?" The man turned around. He looked Tom in the eye, and his expression was open and friendly. "Hi," he said. His voice was soft, calm. "Just looking, thanks. I saw the bike in the window and wanted to take a closer look." Tom frowned slightly. He pointed toward the corner of the showroom where a vintage motorcycle was displayed on a raised platform. It was a beautiful machine, black chrome and leather, but it was more of a showpiece than a seller. It had been sitting there for months. "Oh, the Norton?" Tom asked, checking his mental list of prices. "That one's a collector's item. It's not for test drives, really." "I figured," the man said with a small nod. "I just appreciate the design. It's a classic." He walked over to the bike, and Tom followed, feeling the irritation bubbling up in his chest. The man leaned over the rope barrier, looking at the engine. He seemed to be respecting the space, not touching anything. "It's a 74, the man said, almost to himself. They had some issues with the electrics on these models, but the sound they made, worth it. Tom shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He didn't care about the sound. He cared about his rent. "Yeah, it's nice," Tom said flatly, "but it's expensive. We're not really negotiating on that one." The visitor looked back at him. There was no offense in his eyes, just a calm understanding. "I'm not looking to buy," he said gently. "I'm just a fan of bikes. I'm on a break from filming nearby and saw it." Tom felt a spike of anger in his chest. On a break from filming. That sounded like a rich person's problem. While Tom was worrying about losing his home, this guy was taking breaks to go look at toys he couldn't afford either. Or maybe he could afford it and just didn't want to pay for it. The injustice of it all made Tom's hands shake slightly. He felt small. He felt like this man was pitying him, and he hated it. "Filming, huh?" Tom muttered, crossing his arms. "Well, we have a lot of people come in just to look. It doesn't pay the bills." The man turned back to the bike. He pointed a finger toward the side of the engine, near the crankcase. "It looks like there's a small oil leak there," he noted quietly. "Right by the gasket. Might want to have the mechanics check that before someone buys it. Could be a mess on the floor." It was a helpful observation. It was the kind of thing a decent person would say, but Tom didn't hear it as help. He heard it as criticism. He heard it as, "You're not doing your job well enough." He felt like the man was pointing out his incompetence in front of the whole empty showroom. Tom felt the blood rush to his face. His heart started hammering against his ribs, hard and fast. The stress of the last few months, the missed payments, the angry calls, the fear of sleeping in his car, it all rose up like a tide. He couldn't hold it back anymore. He didn't want to be polite. He didn't want to smile. "Listen," Tom snapped, his voice loud and sharp in the quiet room. "I know how to do my job. I don't need some guy off the street telling me about oil leaks. If you aren't buying, maybe you should just go." The man looked at him, surprised. He blinked, tilting his head slightly. He didn't look angry, he looked concerned. "Hey," he said softly, holding his hands up slightly, palms open. "I was just trying to help, no need to get upset." That was it, that soft tone. That calmness, it felt like mockery to Tom. It felt like the man was looking down on him, treating him like a child having a tantrum. The red haze filled Tom's vision. He couldn't think about the consequences. He couldn't think about the cameras or the fact that this was a place of business. He just wanted the noise in his head to stop. He wanted to wipe that sympathetic look off the man's face. Tom took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He didn't say a word. He just balled his right hand into a tight fist, his fingernails digging into his palm, and swung. The sound that followed wasn't the loud crash of a movie fight. It was a dull, heavy thud, the kind of noise that makes your stomach drop when you hear it. Tom's fist connected squarely with the stranger's jaw. It was a solid impact, the force of it vibrating all the way up Tom's arm and rattling his own shoulder. For a split second, time seemed to stop completely. The air conditioning hummed in the background, and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside suddenly felt very far away. The man stumbled backward. He didn't fall to the ground in a heap like they do in the movies. Instead, he stepped back quickly, his boots scuffing against the polished concrete floor. He lost his balance and sat down heavily on the raised platform next to the vintage motorcycle. One of his hands went instinctively to his face, covering his mouth, while the other braced against the bike's leather seat to keep himself from sliding all the way to the floor. Tom stood there, his fist still clenched in the air, his chest heaving up and down. The rage that had exploded inside him just a moment ago vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, shocking emptiness. He looked at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. He looked at the man sitting on the platform. There was blood. It was welling up between the man's fingers where he held his face. For a terrifying moment, Tom thought the man was going to spring up and attack him. That is what normal people do, right? If you hit someone, they hit you back. Tom tensed his muscles, bracing himself for a fight, his heart hammering so hard against his ribs that it hurt. He deserved it. He knew he deserved it. He had just assaulted a customer in the middle of the day for absolutely no reason. But the attack never came. The man slowly lowered his hand from his face. He looked at the blood on his fingertips, his expression calm and almost curious rather than furious. He touched his jaw gingerly, wincing slightly, and then looked up at Tom. Tom expected screaming. He expected shouting for the police. Instead, the man just looked at him with a pair of eyes that were incredibly sad. There was no hate in them. There was no anger. It was the strangest thing Tom had ever seen. The man looked at him like he was trying to figure out a puzzle, like he was looking right past the violence and trying to see the person underneath. "Hey," the man said. His voice was a bit raspy, probably from the impact, but it was steady. "Take it easy, man." Before Tom could even process this response, heavy footsteps pounded across the showroom floor. The two security guards, who had been drinking coffee near the front desk, came running. They were big guys, usually used to dealing with shoplifters or rowdy teenagers, but they moved fast when they saw what happened. "Hey, break it up," one of them shouted, grabbing Tom by the shoulder and spinning him around. The other guard rushed toward the man on the platform, reaching for his walkie-talkie to call the police. "No, wait," the man on the platform said. He held up a hand toward the guard approaching him. His voice cut through the tension. "Don't call the police, it's okay." The guard froze, looking confused. He looked from the bleeding man back to Tom, who was now being pinned against the hood of a nearby sedan by the other security guard. "Sir, he assaulted you," the guard stammered. "We have to report this." "I'm fine," the man said. He wiped his hand on a handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. He stood up slowly, testing his balance. He looked a little shaky, but he was upright. "Really, I don't want any trouble." Tom felt his knees go weak. If the guard let go of him, he was sure he would slide right down to the floor. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him feeling shaky and sick. He couldn't understand this. Why wasn't this guy fighting back? Why wasn't he demanding Tom be thrown in jail? Tom had just ruined his own life completely. He was definitely going to jail. He was going to lose his job. He was going to lose everything. The man on the platform stepped down, moving closer to where Tom was being held. The security guard tightened his grip on Tom's collar, ready to drag him away if the stranger gave the word. "It was my fault," the stranger said to the guards, which made Tom's jaw drop open. "I pushed him. I was being intrusive." "What?" Tom whispered, his voice cracking. "No, I hit you." The man ignored Tom's protest for a second and looked back at the guards. "Please, just let him go. We're good." The guards looked at each other, completely lost. They had never dealt with a situation like this. Usually, the victim wanted the assailant's head on a platter. Finally, the guard holding Tom shoved him forward slightly. "You're lucky," the guard growled in Tom's ear. "If he presses charges, you're done. Get out of here." Tom stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of a desk. He didn't run. He couldn't move. He just stood there, sweating, his heart still racing, staring at the man who was now checking his teeth in the reflection of the motorcycle's mirror. The man turned back to Tom. He took a small step closer, close enough that Tom could smell the faint scent of soap and cigarettes on his clothes. He looked Tom right in the eye. The silence stretched out between them, heavy and thick. "You look like you're carrying a really heavy load right now," the man said softly. It wasn't an insult. It sounded like genuine concern, like something a friend would say after a long, hard day. "Whatever it is, hitting me isn't going to make it lighter." Tom felt a lump form in his throat, hard and painful. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness, but the words stuck in his throat. He felt small. He felt dirty. This stranger who he had just punched in the face was showing him more kindness than Tom had shown anyone in months. It was unbearable. I don't know why I did that," Tom stammered, his eyes filling with tears that he viciously tried to blink away. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," the man nodded slowly. He touched his jaw again, which was starting to swell and turn a dark shade of red. "I get it," the man said. "Life gets hard sometimes, but you can't hurt people just because you're hurting." "That's not how it works." Tom just nodded, unable to speak. The shame washed over him in waves, hotter than the anger had been. He realized then that he hadn't punched this man because of the bike, or the comment about the oil, or the filming. He had punched him because he hated himself. And now, looking at the calm, bloody face of the stranger, that self-hatred was worse than ever. "I'm going to go," the man said. He looked at the guards and gave them a small, reassuring nod. "I think I'll just head out. I've caused enough trouble for one day." He walked toward the exit. He didn't look back at the shiny cars. He didn't look at the bike he had admired. He just walked with that same slow, steady pace he had when he came in. He reached the glass doors and they slid open with the same smooth hiss. Tom watched him go. The sunlight hit the man's back as he stepped out onto the street, and for a second he was silhouetted against the bright afternoon. Then the doors slid shut, cutting off the view. The showroom was quiet again, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the heavy breathing of the security guards. Tom stood alone in the middle of the floor. His fist was throbbing now, swelling up to match the jaw of the man he had hit. He looked around at the empty showroom, at the cars he couldn't sell, and at the security guards who were looking at him with a mix of disgust and pity. The reality of what had just happened crashed down on him. He hadn't just lost a sale, he had lost his dignity. And standing there in the silence, the regret began to eat him alive. Starting in the pit of his stomach and spreading out until he couldn't breathe. The silence that followed the man's departure was heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind that hangs in the air after a disaster, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Tom stood frozen in the middle of the showroom floor, his hand throbbing with a slow, steady beat that matched the pounding of his heart. The security guards were shifting their weight awkwardly, looking at each other and then back at Tom, unsure of what to do next. They weren't used to this. They were used to thieves shouting and running away, not to a quiet victim walking out and offering forgiveness. Then, the door to the back office swung open with a bang. The manager stormed out, his face a deep shade of red. He had been watching on the security cameras. He marched across the polished floor, his expensive dress shoes clicking sharply against the concrete. He didn't say a word to the guards. He walked straight up to Tom, stopping just inches from his face. Tom could smell the coffee on the manager's breath and the expensive cologne that usually made him feel inferior, but now just made him feel nauseous. "What is wrong with you?" the manager hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you just punch a customer?" "In my showroom?" Tom opened his mouth to speak, to explain about the bad day, the stress, the way the man had looked at him, but the words died in his throat. There was no explanation. There was no excuse. He just lowered his head and stared at the manager's shoes. I lost my temper," Tom whispered, his voice sounding weak and pathetic. "Lost your temper?" The manager threw his hands up in the air. "You just committed a felony, you idiot. That man could have us shut down. He could sue us for everything we have." "Do you have any idea who that was?" Tom shook his head slowly. He really didn't. He just looked like a regular guy, maybe an actor, maybe a construction worker, just a person. "That was Keanu Reeves." The manager spat the name out like it was poison. "And you punched him in the face." The name hit Tom like a physical blow. He knew the name, of course, everyone did. But he hadn't recognized the man without the movie makeup and the costumes. He had just seen a quiet guy in a jacket. The realization made Tom's stomach turn over. He hadn't just attacked a stranger, he had attacked a beloved public figure. He had attacked a man known for being kind. The shame deepened, threatening to pull him under completely. "You're done," the manager said, his voice final. "Get your stuff and get out. Don't expect a reference. Don't expect a paycheck for the rest of the week. Just go." Tom didn't argue. He didn't beg for his job, even though the thought of losing his income sent a spike of terror through his chest. He just nodded and turned toward the break room. He could feel the eyes of the sales team and the other staff burning into his back as he walked away. He heard the whispers start as soon as he turned the corner. "Did you hear? He punched Keanu Reeves. He's crazy." He gathered his meager belongings from his small locker, a photo of his kids he hadn't seen in months, a spare tie. A half-empty bottle of painkillers for his back. He shoved them into a plastic bag. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely zip his jacket up. He walked out through the back exit, avoiding the front showroom where the shiny cars mocked him one last time. He walked out into the parking lot. The sun was still bright, beating down on the asphalt. It felt wrong that the weather was so nice. It felt like the world should be dark and stormy to match how he felt inside. He got into his old, battered sedan. The car smelled like stale fast food and old smoke. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He looked at his phone. It was blowing up with notifications. He had a few missed calls from friends and a flood of text messages. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen before he opened a social media app. There it was, a video taken by one of the customers who had been watching from a distance. The title was screaming in all caps, "Car dealer attacks Keanu Reeves." He pressed play. The audio was muffled, but the video was clear. He saw himself standing there, tense and angry. He saw the stranger talking calmly. And then he saw the swing. It looked even worse on video. It looked violent and unprovoked. He watched himself standing there like a thug while the other man touched his jaw and told the guards not to call the police. Tom scrolled down to the comments. They were brutal. "Who does this guy think he is? I hope he goes to jail. Keanu is such a saint for not pressing charges. I would have destroyed that guy. Look at the dealer, he looks miserable." What a loser. Tom threw the phone onto the passenger seat and put his head in his hands. He felt like he couldn't breathe. The entire world hated him. Strangers who didn't know anything about his life, his debts, his struggles were judging him. And the worst part was they were right. He had acted like a loser. He had acted like a bully. He started the car and drove home. The drive felt like a blur. He ran a red light and honked at no one, his aggression bubbling up again before he forced it down. He felt trapped in a corner of his own making. When he finally pulled up to his small apartment building, he saw a group of teenagers hanging out by the entrance. They pointed at his car and whispered. Word traveled fast. He rushed past them, keeping his head down, and fumbled with his keys to get into the building. He didn't have a heavy wooden door to slam shut to hide from the world, just a thin, hollow metal door that clicked shut weakly. He locked it, but it didn't make him feel safe. He sat on his worn-out couch. The apartment was dark and quiet. The final notice for the rent was still sitting on the counter where he had left it that morning. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Before he had thrown his life away, Tom sat there for hours as the sun went down. He didn't turn on the lights, he didn't eat. He just sat in the dark, staring at the wall, replaying the moment over and over again. He saw the man's face. He saw the blood. He heard the man say, "I get it." That was the part that hurt the most. The man had gotten it. He had looked at Tom, a complete stranger who had just punched him, and he had seen that Tom was in pain. He had offered empathy when Tom had offered violence. It made Tom feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He realized he wasn't just a bad employee or a man in debt. He was a man who had lost his humanity, and he didn't know how to get it back. He looked at his hand again. The swelling had gone down a little, but it was bruised and purple. It was a permanent mark, a reminder of the worst decision he had ever made. He curled his hand into a fist and cried, alone in the dark, regretting everything. The morning light that crept through the thin blinds of Tom's apartment didn't feel warm. It felt harsh and exposing, like a spotlight shining on a stage where he didn't want to be. He opened his eyes, and for a second he forgot everything. He thought it was just a normal Tuesday, and he had to get ready for work. Then the memory of the punch crashed into him, heavier than any hangover. He groaned and rolled over, burying his face in the pillow that smelled like old sweat and despair. His phone was buzzing on the nightstand. It had been buzzing all night, or so it seemed. Tom reached out a trembling hand and grabbed it. He didn't even have to unlock it to see the notifications. Hundreds of them. Emails, texts, social media tags. The internet had found him. They knew his name. They knew where he worked or where he used to work. They were tearing him apart in the comment sections. Losers like you don't deserve to breathe. I hope your hand falls off. Keanu should have pressed charges. Tom threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and fell onto the carpet. He lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling fan that wobbled as it spun. He felt paralyzed. It wasn't just the fear of legal trouble or the fact that he was now unemployed. It was the sheer weight of being hated by thousands of people he had never met. He felt like a monster. Around noon, hunger forced him out of bed. His stomach was churning, empty, and acidic. He walked into the tiny kitchen and stared at the empty fridge. He didn't have money for groceries, not really. He had maybe $20 to his name until he figured something out. He grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter. His hand was still swollen, the bruises now turning a nasty purple and green. It hurt to grip the glass. He turned on the small TV sitting on the counter. He needed noise, anything to drown out his own thoughts. The news was on, of course. They were still talking about the incident. They had analysts on discussing workplace violence and celebrity culture. Then the anchor switched topics. In lighter news, the anchor said, actor Keanu Reeves made a quiet visit to the Westside Community Shelter yesterday, dropping off a large donation of supplies. Tom stopped drinking his water. He watched the screen. There was a shaky video clip taken by a fan outside the shelter. It showed Keanu, the man Tom had punched, smiling and carrying boxes of food. He looked fine. There was a small bandage on his jaw, barely visible, but his eyes were bright. He was laughing with the volunteers. He looked happy. Tom felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was a mix of jealousy and awe. This man, who had every right to be angry, who could have been at home icing his face and calling a lawyer, was out helping people. He was doing good. Tom looked at himself in the dirty reflection of the kitchen window. He was doing nothing. He was just sitting in his dark apartment, feeling sorry for himself. "I get it," he remembered the man saying. Tom realized then that sitting there wasn't going to fix anything. He couldn't take back the punch, he couldn't unhit him, but he could do something else. He couldn't go to Keanu, that would be stalking, but he could go to the place Keanu cared about. He didn't want praise, he didn't want forgiveness. He just needed to do something that wasn't terrible. Tom grabbed his toolbox from the closet. It was heavy, filled with hammers, wrenches, and nails. He carried it out to his car, his hand screaming in protest with every step. He drove across town, his heart hammering against his ribs the whole way. He felt like everyone he passed on the street knew who he was. He kept his head down. The West Side Community Shelter was a modest brick building in a part of the city that had seen better days. The paint was peeling, and the yard was overgrown. Tom pulled up around the back, parking his car out of sight. He saw people moving around inside, but he didn't go in. He wasn't ready to face anyone yet. He walked around the perimeter of the property. That was when he saw it. The wooden fence that ran along the alleyway was in bad shape. It looked like it had been damaged by a storm or maybe a car accident. Several of the pickets were broken, and a whole section had fallen over, leaving a gap in the perimeter. It looked sad. It looked broken. Tom looked at the fence and saw himself. He opened his toolbox. He didn't ask for permission, he just went to work. The physical labor was hard. His hand hurt every time he swung the hammer. The sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, mixing with the dirt on his skin. But he didn't stop. He pulled out the rotten wood. He found scrap lumber in a dumpster nearby, lucky break, and measured it against the gaps. For the first time in days, his mind went quiet. The voices of the internet trolls, the yelling of his boss, the screaming of his own insecurities, they all faded away. There was only the rhythm of the work. Hammer, nail, bang, hammer, nail. Bang, he worked for hours. The sun moved across the sky, shifting the shadows of the buildings. A few people walked by in the alley. Some looked at him strangely, a man in a cheap suit fixing a fence with a swollen hand. But no one bothered him. He thought about Keanu as he worked. He thought about the man's calmness. Tom tried to find that calmness inside himself. It wasn't there yet. He still felt a burning ball of anger in his gut, anger at the world, at his landlord, at the economy. But as he nailed the last board into place, straightening it so it looked perfect, the fire cooled down just a little. He wasn't fixing his life. He knew that. He still had no job. He still had debts. He was still the guy who punched a movie star, but this fence was fixed. This one small thing in the world was no longer broken because of him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tom wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at the fence. It wasn't perfect, but it was strong. It would hold. He felt exhausted, a deep, bone-tired weariness that felt different from the depression of the morning. This was a clean tiredness. He packed his tools back into the box, his hands shaking again, but this time from exertion, not fear. He stood up and looked at the shelter building. He saw a light turn on in a window. He wondered if Keanu would ever come back here. He wondered if the actor would ever know that the bad guy had fixed the fence. Probably not, and that was okay. Tom got back into his car. He didn't feel happy exactly, but the crushing weight on his chest felt just a fraction lighter. He had done one good thing. It was a start. He started the engine and drove away, leaving the broken fence fixed behind him. Tom was back at the shelter 2 days later. He hadn't planned on coming back, but he found himself driving there anyway. The fence looked good from the street, but he had noticed a few spots where the paint was peeling on the posts, and he couldn't leave it unfinished. It wasn't about perfection, it was about respect. He parked his car around the back again, the same spot where the dumpster hid him from the main road. The morning was cool, a crisp breeze cutting through the air. Tom pulled on his work gloves. His hand was still sore, the knuckles stiff and ugly shades of yellow and blue, but he could grip a paintbrush now. He opened the can of gray paint he had bought with the last of his cash money. He dipped the brush in and started to apply a fresh coat to the wood. The rhythmic sound of the brush against the wood was calming. Swish, swish, swish. Tom focused on the grain of the wood, making sure he covered every spot. He tried to keep his mind empty, but it was hard. He was still technically unemployed. The bills were still piling up on his kitchen counter. The internet was still probably talking about him. But for these few hours, he wasn't that guy who punched Keanu Reeves. He was just a man painting a fence. Around noon, he heard a car engine. It wasn't the loud rumble of a truck or the swoosh of a passing sedan. It was a quiet, expensive hum. Tom froze, his brush hovering in midair. He didn't turn around immediately. He told himself it was probably just a delivery truck or a donor dropping off clothes. But then he heard the car door shut. It was a soft, solid sound. He heard footsteps on the pavement. They weren't rushing, they were slow and steady. Tom slowly turned his head, his breath caught in his throat. Standing at the corner of the building, looking at the freshly repaired fence, was Keanu Reeves. He was wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, his hands in his pockets. He looked exactly as he had the other day, except for the small bandage on his jaw that was now barely noticeable. Tom felt the blood drain from his face. His instinct was to run. He wanted to drop the paintbrush, jump in his car, and speed away. He was terrified. He thought Keanu was here to yell at him, or worse, to call the police and tell them Tom was harassing him at his favorite charity. Tom's legs felt like lead. He couldn't move. He just stood there, clutching the paintbrush like a weapon, his heart hammering against his ribs. Keanu looked up from the fence and saw him. For a second, Tom thought he saw a flash of surprise in the actor's eyes. But it wasn't fear, it was recognition. Keanu didn't frown, he didn't turn away, he just nodded. He started walking toward Tom. Tom wanted to say something. He wanted to apologize again, but his throat felt closed up. He felt small and dirty in his old work clothes, covered in specks of gray paint. Here was this famous movie star, a man who had everything, walking toward a man who had thrown his life away in a moment of rage. Keanu stopped a few feet away. He looked at the fence, then back at Tom. He pointed to the section where Tom had replaced the broken boards. "You did a nice job," Keanu said. His voice was quiet, carrying easily in the still air. "This fence was falling over for months. I was wondering who was going to fix it." I just wanted to help," Tom stammered. His voice was shaky. "I didn't want you to think. I mean, I'm not stalking you. I owed something to the place, to you." Keanu looked at him intently. He shifted his weight, looking at Tom's swollen hand. "Does it hurt?" Tom looked down at his hand. "Yeah, it hurts." "Good," Keanu said softly. "It should." Tom flinched. He knew he deserved that. He looked down at his boots, shame washing over him all over again. "I am so sorry," he blurted out, the words rushing out in a jumble. "I was so angry at my own life. I lost my job, I'm losing my house, and I took it out on you. It wasn't fair, you were just being nice. I'm a mess." "I know that." He stopped to take a breath, terrified he was going to cry in front of John Wick. Keanu waited for him to finish. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look impatient. He just stood there listening. When Tom was done, Keanu took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "We all have bad days," Keanu said. He stepped a little closer, closing the gap between them. "Sometimes the bad days pile up on top of each other, until you can't see the light anymore." "I get that, I really do." He paused, looking Tom in the eye. "But you can't hit people. You can't let the darkness inside you spill out onto other people. That's not how it works. You hurt people and then you're just alone in the dark with more pain." "I know," Tom whispered. "I know that now." Keanu looked at the fence one more time. "You're fixing this fence, that's a start. You're taking something that was broken and you're making it strong again. That's more important than being sorry. Apologies are just words. He gestured to the freshly painted wood. "This is action." Tom felt a lump form in his throat, but it wasn't the painful lump of shame. It was different. It felt like something was loosening inside his chest. "Thank you for not pressing charges," Tom said. "You saved my life, probably." Keanu shook his head. "You save your own life, man. I just gave you a chance. What you do with it is up to you." Keanu extended his right hand toward Tom. Tom looked at the hand. It was the hand that Keanu had used to check his jaw after Tom punched him. It was a gesture of peace. Tom hesitated for a split second. He was terrified that Keanu would squeeze his injured hand, that this was some kind of trap, but he pushed the fear away. He set down the paintbrush. Tom took off his dirty glove. He reached out and took Keanu's hand. Keanu's grip was firm but not crushing. He didn't try to hurt Tom. He didn't squeeze the bruised knuckles. He just held Tom's hand for a moment, shaking it once solidly. It wasn't the handshake of a celebrity to a fan. It was the handshake of one man to another. Make sure tomorrow is better than today, Keanu said. I will, Tom promised. I really will. Keanu nodded once, a small, serious smile on his face. He let go of Tom's hand and turned around. He walked back toward his car, the same slow, steady walk he had when he arrived. He didn't look back, he didn't wave. He just got into his car and drove away, leaving the quiet street just as it was before. Tom stood there for a long time after the car was gone. He looked at his hand. It was still bruised. It was still going to hurt for a while. But as he looked at the fence, stretching out long and strong against the sky, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt hope. He wasn't fixed. He still had to go home and face his bills. He still had to find a new job. He still had a lot of hard work ahead of him. But the heavy, suffocating weight of self-hatred was gone. He had messed up badly, but he had also been forgiven, and now he had a job to do. Tom picked up his paintbrush. He dipped it in the can and looked at the next section of the fence. He took a deep breath of the cool air and started to paint. Swish, swish, swish. It was going to be a better day. He was going to make sure of it.